When you hear the name Richard the Lionheart, what comes to mind? Probably a noble English king, right? A chivalrous knight, the heroic leader of the Third Crusade. He's this legendary figure, almost more myth than man. But as we're about to find out, the legend is really only half the story. To really get to the truth, let's kick things off with this quote from the great historian Stephen Runciman. He said Richard was a bad son, a bad husband, and a bad king, but a gallant and splendid soldier. Wow. I mean, that's a pretty bold statement, and it just slices right through the popular myth. So that really makes you wonder, right? If he wasn't this perfect storybook hero, then who was the real Richard the Lionheart? Let's peel back those layers of legend and see what we can find. All right, to really get a handle on the man, we've got to go back to the beginning. And here's the first curveball. Our story doesn't really kick off in England. Nope, it starts in France. So, first thing you need to know, Richard was the third son. Now, in the brutal world of medieval royalty, that's a huge deal. It basically meant he was never, ever supposed to be king of England. He had older brothers in line ahead of him. And get this, it's not just about birth order. It's about where he grew up. He wasn't raised in London. He spent his entire childhood in the Duchy of Aquitaine, deep in what's now southwestern France. That was his mom, Eleanor of Aquitaine's territory, and it shaped, well, everything about him. And this just hammers home how fundamentally French he was. I mean, he didn't even speak English. He spoke French and Occitan, the local language of southern France. He was made Duke of Aquitaine when he was just a teenager, only 14. And here's the wild part. He spent a good chunk of his youth actively rebelling against his own father, the King of England, and often teamed up with the King of France to do it. So let's be clear. This wasn't some English prince in waiting. This was a powerful, ambitious French noble through and through. Okay, so let's shift gears. Because for all his French roots, there's one chapter of his life that would cement his name in history forever, the Third Crusade. And look, on the battlefield, the guy was a rock star, an absolute genius. On his way to the Holy Land in 1191, he just casually conquers the entire island of Cyprus. A couple of months later, he's the main reason the Crusaders captured the super important port city of Acre. Then, he marches his army down the coast and beats the legendary Saladin himself at the Battle of Arsuf. I mean, this is where the legend of the Lionheart was born. But, yeah, behind all that shining armor and those incredible victories, there's a much, much darker side to the story. And it can be summed up with just one chilling number. 2,700. That's the number of Muslim prisoners who Richard ordered to be executed after Acre fell. The justification? He thought they'd slow his army down. It's just a brutal reminder that this gallant soldier could also be terrifyingly ruthless. So while Richard is off becoming a legend in the East, you gotta wonder, what was going on back in England? And this gets us to the real core of his kingship. He was the absent king, and his adventures were about to put his kingdom in chains. Yeah, the trip home did not go as planned. It was a total disaster. He gets shipwrecked. He's traveling in disguise, and then bam, he gets captured near Vienna by one of his rivals, Leopold of Austria, the same guy he'd publicly insulted back at Acre. Leopold then turns him over to the Holy Roman Emperor. And the emperor, he saw a golden opportunity. The price tag for setting the most famous king in the world free, a mind-blowing 150,000 marks. And to put that number in perspective, this wasn't just a lot of money. It was an absolutely insane amount. We're talking 2 or even 3 times the entire annual income of the English government. To get their king back, the people of England were taxed into the ground. Churches were stripped of their gold and silver. It was a national crisis. And here's the truly unbelievable part. All of this crippling ransom, was for a king who barely even thought of England as his home. Over his entire 10-year reign, want to guess how much time Richard spent in England? About 6 months. Total. For him, England wasn't a kingdom to govern. It was basically just a piggy bank to fund his real passion, war. So after all that, when he's finally free, you'd think he'd rush back to England and thank everyone, right? Nope, not a chance. His final years were spent exactly where his heart was, back in France, fighting to keep his continental empire from falling apart. I mean, just look at his to-do list. He lands in Normandy, not England. First thing he does is forgive his traitorous brother John, not out of love, but because he needed him for the main event, a non-stop war against the King of France. And his greatest building project? It wasn't some cathedral in London. It was Chateau Rayard, this massive, cutting-edge fortress built to defend Normandy. And the final twist in the story is just dripping with irony. The great Lionheart, the King of England, didn't die defending his kingdom. He didn't die on a holy crusade. He died from a random crossbow shot while attacking a tiny, insignificant castle in France. He died exactly as he lived, as a French warlord fighting for his French land. Okay, so let's wrap this up. It's time for the final weigh-in, the man versus the myth.
First, let's talk about the nickname itself, Coeur de Lion, the Lionheart. Did he earn it? Oh, absolutely, 100%. Nobody can argue with his personal courage or his skill as a military leader. On the battlefield, he was every bit the legend.
But when you zoom out, the full picture is, well, it's a lot messier. The legend tells us about a pious English hero, but the reality is he was a French-speaking duke. The legend paints a picture of a chivalrous king. History shows us a ruler who is almost never there. A protector of the realm? More like the guy who drained its bank account for his own wars. A gallant crusader? For sure, but a ruthless one too. In the end, Richard got exactly what he wanted. He cemented his personal legacy as the greatest warrior of his time. But that fame came at a huge, huge cost. He left his kingdom bankrupt, and his total focus on his French territories kicked off the slow collapse of his family's huge empire. So that leaves us with one last question to chew on. When we talk about Richard the Lionheart, was he really a great hero, or was he, when you get right down to it, just a great soldier?